Okay, welcome to our fourth video tutorial for this workshop. So this time we're gonna deal with something a little bit more complex, and it's still gonna use everything that we've seen so far. So for this video tutorial, I'm gonna focus in how to use Ladybug and a few of its tools. In this case, it's actually specific. It's going to be a specific to, let me put this to have all the names. The sun path and the direct sun hours. So this graph in here that you already have is you can find it in the workshop files as S2 and -3 case study exercise. When you open that file, you're actually going to find as well this one at the beginning, which is going to have a lot of things connected to it. If I remember correctly, is something like this. This is just matching this building rotation, floor rotation. That this is taking actually all the analysis that I did in Galapagos, which is this pane component in here, which I'm going to explain in the next video tutorial. This is still a little bit more confusing, so I'm not going to put it in all in one. First, we need to understand what Ladybug is doing in here, what kind of information is taking and what kind of information is giving us to analyze. So to start with, I'm just gonna do a recap of everything that we've done so far. So I'm just gonna create this tower again for you to have a good idea. I'm gonna create a new file. Let's see how this goes. New document. And let's just recap what everything that we've done. So first, we created that rectangle. I'm gonna zoom to the one. Zoom. Here we go. Let's have a look like that. I don't like seeing that plan, so I extract the component, git preview. Actually, let's put this one again. And that way I don't see that plane all the time. I might do this a few times, so just for visual appearance. Now let's make a square that is 1000 millimeters and 1000 millimeters. Oop, there you go. Now I don't want around the corner, so I'm going to leave it in 0. We want to then move this so we can have each one of the floors. I want to move it in the Z direction. I wanted to move it upwards, and I want this to move in. I want it to give me multiple floors. That is going to be, each floor is going to be let's say actually 3000, something standard generic. I'm going to put in the step. I want it to start in 0, and I want let's say 6 floors. Okay, something that I like to do just to keep things organized is that I change the names of the sliders so I know what I'm doing. So for this slider, I'm gonna give it the name of floor heights. To do that is just right click, and it's gonna show you this menu, and at the beginning it's gonna be empty. So if you hover right at the top, you'll be able to click and rename the slider. So for this one, it's gonna be number of floors. There you go. You can do the same for actually all of the components. If you right click, even if they have a name, you actually are able to change it. So floors variables, if you wanted to. If you have this display option of draw icons, since I'm not going to show you the name, if you switch it again to not showing the icons, it's going to show you the name. That's something to keep in mind. For the sake of this tutorial, to make it easy for you to see what components I'm using, I'm going to keep it with the icons, and Actually, you can also switch individual components if you want to have the name all the time. Just go here when you right click right in the middle. If you right click in the letters, that is the input, it's going to give you a different information that is only for that input. So something to keep in mind. You have to go right in the middle, and it's going to give you those that option to switch it off and change the name. So again, I'm just going to show the icon, but I'm going to change the name of the sliders so it's a little bit more organized. And I like to keep all the variables that I want to change in the future right and left, so it's easier to visualize when I'm creating a new graph. A few things that come handy. I'm going to change this to size of base, building base, let's call it building base. And that way I can switch things really quickly. Now this series, as we've seen before, is going to give you the distance in which each of these rectangles is going to move using the move component. So plug it in. Now I have all this. Case G big. Let's make this a better proportion. Like that, it might not be realistic. It's just for the sake of the video. Okay. Now I have the base of each one of the floors. Perfect. Then what we did, it was to rotate each one of those rectangles. I need to give it a center, an area. So Grasshopper knows that each one of these rectangles, rectangle 0, is going to move following its own point, which is going to be point 0 in the index 0. So rectangle 0, which is this one at the bottom, we use an item. It's always good to verify the information that you have. Rectangle 0, index 0, there you go, is gonna go, we plug in now this, we have index 0, it's gonna be the same. And you can verify the information is correct. I just type in the numbers for a slider, connect this. Now if I select both are going to take the index 0, and I know that index 0 is that one, index 1 is that one, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So now Grasshopper knows that, plug it in here, each one of these rectangles is going to rotate following each one of these points, which is going to match. And for the angle, I'm going to set it into degrees, just right clicking the letter A for angle. I'm going to delete this, keeping things clean. The angle, I want it to be, let's also preview this off so it doesn't show up in the screen. Now for the angle, how do I want to rotate this? One thing is that I wanted to give each one of these floors a different angle. Now I will need to make sure that every time that I increase this number, Grasshopper knows that it needs to increase the number of angles that it's gonna use. And this might be something new that I haven't showed before. That is gonna be the component list length. List length. This one you can find the right in sets. And then list length, which, as the name says, is just going to give you how many elements are in one list. So if we visualize, plugging in here to the result of the move component, that is going to be 7 rectangles, 0 to 6. And if I show what is this giving me, 7. So it's just going to give me the count of how many elements I have in a list. Okay. Now Grasshopper can know that a Okay, I need 7 angles. But now, how can I determine all those angles? Well, I can also make a series, as I did with the floors. So I can give it a count as well, and it will know what to do. But this series, I wanted it to go from 0 to 180. So it always follows, it's always between those angles. It never rotates completely at 360. So that's actually different than a series. That the logic goes directly into the series because we've used it before, but there's something called range. That the range is going to be, okay, I want to get a list, same as a series, but this list is going to be between 2 numbers instead of just increasing by a number that I give it, which is what I did in here in the series. I'm creating a list that is starts with 1 number and increases following the number that I give it, which is in this case 450. And you just give me the amount of numbers that I give it in here. Now the range is going to take, first it's going to take a domain, which is, a domain is, you need to use this construct domain component. There's multiple of those. I recommend you to look online and you can type these names and you're going to find some information for those. I'll try to explain more of this while we advance in the workshop, but just for this one, this is the one that you need. A domain is simply a range of numbers from one to another. In this case, you can give it whatever number you want. Let's plug it upon in a panel. And by default, it's going to be A is going to be 0 and B is going to be 1. But we want this list that we're creating to go from 0 to 180. Just in case that you don't remember from the previous tutorials, you can determine how the slider is going to work by typing double point. Or you can also see sometimes online that you can use this one. It's going to do the same thing. So now it goes from 0 to 180. I'm just going to copy this, pressing Alt, and now if I plug it into A and B, now I get it to 0, 180. This is what you get, just information that is go from 0 to 180. Now in the range component, the first thing that it asks you for is domain. And you can see by default it says 0 to 1. When you see anything that you see that it says 0 to another number is asking for a domain. This is how you determine those using construct domain. Now, if we plug in a panel in here, you're gonna get a list of numbers going from 0 to 180. It has 10 elements because by default, this n, that is the step, in this case, the step is the numbers that will count between 0 and 180, or the domain that we give it. But we actually know that we need the same amount of angles as the same amount of rectangles. So that's why I use this list length component. So I can just connect this one into that number, and now the list that is going to give me is going to follow that information. If I change the amount of floors, let's make it 10. Now this list length component is going to take the number of rectangles I have in here. It's going to count how many are there, which is now 10, 0 to 9. Remember, lists start from 0 in Grasshopper. So it says that it has 10 elements. It's going to tell the range to create 10 elements. Perfect. Now we have the same amount of angles for the same amount of rectangles, and we can plug that into the rotate component. I'm just gonna organize this a little bit more Always like to keep things clean and tidy so I can follow along the information that I'm giving to Grasshopper. And if there's anything that I need to change, I could go back really easily. Okay, now we have all of those flows rotating. But something really interesting happens. And this is why it gets a little bit confusing sometimes when it comes to lists. And that you gave it 10 elements to the list. But if you look closely to the rectangle list, yes, it is 10 elements, but it actually goes from 0 to 9. And when you tell it that you want to go from, you want to create 10 elements, it actually creates 10, 0 to 10. So that's going to be wrong. You again need to match always the data the same way. So what happening here is that because the angles go from 0 to 10, there's one extra number that is not matching with anything in here. But Grasshopper, what it does is simply repeats the last item. So this 9 goes to this 9, but the 10 is going to repeat then to 9. And if I create more of these angles, it's going to just keep adding those to 9. So just to illustrate, I'm going to create a slide that goes to 0 to 20. And instead of this list length, I'm going to plug that slider. And as you can see here, now I'm going to create, goes well. It's start to match all the data. 0, it's going to be with 0, and goes up to 5, 180. And you can see here that after that, 6, 7, 8, and 9 don't have any angle. So those remain the same because you're not giving it any information. So Grasshopper is just going to make it the same because it is still going to give you the same amount of rectangles that you're going to give it. And now if I keep going, you can see how each one of those rectangles starts to rotate. But here, this is what happens when you reach 9. Any number after that is just going to repeat on itself on the last item that you have. So let's go back to 9. Perfect. That's working fine. But 10, 11, 12, 13. Just going to use the same 9th item in the rectangle list. So something to keep in mind. So how can we fix this? So Grasshopper knows that it's always this list length -1. Well, there's a few ways. You can find the component that is called expression. You can make it a little bit more graphical, or at least that you can see in the Grasshopper canvas. And this expression component, you can actually double click, just double clicking in the center of the panel. And this gets a little bit fun using mathematical functions. And you can do something like x minus y. And now it's going to take the number that you give it in x and the number you're going to give in y, and it's going to do the operation that you have in there and give you a result. Beautiful. So we want to take this 10 minus 1, and now we have 9, which is the right amount that we need. And now if we move this slider, that is the number of flows, it's always going to keep the same, the correct number of elements matching all the time. So 0 to 9, 0 to 9, all the time. Doesn't matter what number you give it. If you go to 4, it's still 0 to 3, 0 to 3, which is 4 flows. But using expression sometimes takes a little bit of space. As you can see, it's an extra component. And at the beginning, it might be useful to do that just for you to be more mindful of what you do. So I would recommend you to try to use the expression component for a little bit while you get used to it. But something else that you can do, which is what I use now, is that if you right click some of the inputs, it will let you use an expression. And this is more common to any data, any input that uses number as the data. So if I go to expression, it's going to do the same thing that you have in that panel, the expression panel. And I can type x minus 1. And this is simply that x, or actually you can put any letter in here. You can use it, the same one that you have already. It's going to take that. I prefer to use x because it's the typical way to do expressions and formulas. So I'm going to tell it x, so whatever I connect in that input, minus 1. Perfect. Now if I connect this, you can see that is still matching the same amount of data. I'm going to delete this one and this one. Remember, and the way to know that there's an expression used somewhere is by that asterisk. So now if I go back to 10 floors, and go back to look the data, you can see it goes 0 to 9, 0 to 9. All these matching again, and the result again 0 to 9. Perfect. Okay, now we have the right amount of floors, rotating this the right amount of times and the right amount of angles, at least the ones that we want to. Then we can extrude. And I want those lines to be extruded into the Z direction, going up. And I want them to grow following the same height, floor height. So I just go back to the variables. That's why it's good to keep all of the variables to the back, so you can refer to those really easily. Now I have all of those, and can use the component cap. So I can make them solid, and then just clean things up by preview off. Now you have those. Can now do this smaller, bigger, more flows, less flows. Perfect. You can even do the base of the rectangle a little bit bigger, smaller. You can actually create a new slider and just, instead of doing a perfect square, you can do different shapes. And that's beautiful. And here, even if you want to change the amount of rotation that each one of those floors is having, you can use these sliders that you create in the construct domain. Just remembering that the actual list that is creating here is given the first rectangle, the 0 rectangle, an angle of 0, and is just dividing equally until it gets to 180. If I make it, for example, 90, slide use 90, double clicking the number, you can do 90. Now the list goes from 0 to 90 and is dividing equally between all of those. So I know the first flow is 0 degrees of rotation, the next one has 10, 20, 30, 40, and so on, until it gets to 90. Cool. So if you want, you can, again, you have to be mindful of the variables that you create and which one you might like to change after, or which one you want to remain as a parameter that is static and is always the same. And I'm going to give it this the name of first floor angle rotation. And last floor angle rotation. Perfect. Nice. We're getting somewhere. Now into Ladybug. This might be quite a lot to take, so You can just slow down this video, pause it, go back, take your time. It might take you a few tries, but the best way to learn Grasshopper is just to jump into the software, drop a few components, and try to create shapes and try to experiment with whichever component that you have at your disposal, right on top. And remember that you can type anything to double click, anything that comes to your mind, you can try typing it, and it will give you a lot of suggestions that it might help you. Okay, let's go into Ladybug.